Is Twitter's legacy blue tick in its final death throes? And why did grocery delivery startup MilkRun close up shop? Hey there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award-winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and this week I'm not joined as usual by Alex Kidman. Instead, I'm cheating on him with my ex. Joining me is longtime Australian technology journalist and former Macworld Australia editor, Anthony Caruana. Anthony, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, mate. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very surprised we're not doing this over a Parma and chips and a drink of something cold over the table.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that many moons ago, you and I co-hosted the Beer O'Clock segment on the Macworld podcast, and I'm wondering if Vertical Hold needs to pivot here, and maybe we can get some investors out there. Clearly, people will throw money at anything these days.
Well, when you actually contacted me to do this, I did contemplate saying, should we meet at that pub down on Spencer Street like we used to? But it didn't seem like the thing to do today.
Until that Carlton Draft sponsorship kicks in, I guess we'll have to make other plans.
Yeah, I think so.
So today we're talking about the ongoing train wreck that is the demise of Twitter's legacy blue tick, plus the demise of MilkRun, once the darling of the Australian startup sector. But first, a quick check of the Vertical Hold news desk reveals that the NBN broke new throughput records last month. What's the story here?
Like, this is kind of really interesting. I think back to the good old days, back 15 or 12 years ago when we started to talk about the NBN in its early incarnation, and the opposition of the day said that why would we ever need a big network like that? Surely no one will ever need more than 13 megabits at home to collect their email and do a bit of web browsing. But it turns out that when your network spikes at 24 terabits per second, which is what happened about just a couple of weeks ago, and that happened because of one little game, Fortnite, releasing one software patch, and all of a sudden, it created this massive spike on the NBN. The good news is that the NBN actually stood up to the whole thing, and has had a couple of similar sorts of spikes afterwards when Fortnite released a couple of other patches. But it turns out we do need a little bit more than 13 megabits per second or 25 megabits per second, and the NBN actually did a really good job of making sure that we did stay up and running and that everyone could still watch their Netflix or watch their preferred streaming service without too much interruption.
Well, that's what I noticed. Some other data was there that said in December, the average download for the NBN was 408 gig per customer. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's heavy users. And I thought, no, hang on, that's at average. That is the average user is 400 gig a month, which sounds like a lot until you break it down to 13 gig a day. And then you think about how much it costs, how much data you need to stream 4K video.
Yeah, look, it's funny. Back in the very early days of cable broadband, I remember, and you probably do as well, Adam, when Optus had its offer where you could use as much data as you like, unlimited, as long as you didn't exceed 10 times the average of the middle 80% of users. It was like it was unlimited, except no one knew how they calculated it because you never had access to the numbers.
It constantly changed, and I had this little plug-in on my computer that was constantly calculating it and telling me how close it was. But while you didn't want to go over that limit, you also wanted to push it, because if you weren't downloading enough, you were letting down the side, because if you had to get that average up, it was just insane.
Yeah, and that's right. And it was pretty funny because you'd do that, but you'd only be shaped until you dropped back under that threshold. So you might only be shaped for 24 or 48 hours. And then you'd come back and you could go back to downloading whatever it was that you were downloading.
Linux
distros on Usenet groups.
Yeah.
And then trying to assemble 88 different zip files in the right order to put it all together to get your Linux distro.
And that was sort of part of the idea with the NBN, is just to get rid of a lot of those problems, create your level playing field. And of course, the problems that people have now with, you might be stuck on satellite, you might be stuck on fiber to the node. We didn't really fix it as well as we hoped we would, did we?
No, look, and I've got family who live in rural areas, and it is a very challenging thing when I'll often go and work at my in-laws' place, which is out in the country. And I'll go there to work for 3 or 4 days. And it's just kind of tricky because all of a sudden you've gone from, I've got a pretty robust connection here at 250 meg down, and I go over there and it's like, oh, hang on, I'm now waiting when I click on something. And there's just that little bit of latency when you start everything. And, Zoom calls are just that little bit trickier, a little bit flakier. Everything's just kind of a little bit worse.
And in interesting related news, I saw that Starlink has cut its hardware prices by about 80% for parts of regional Australia and New Zealand. So they clearly see an opportunity there.
Yeah, well, they've got a pretty nice monthly fee on Starlink, so I imagine that they'd recoup that hardware cost pretty quickly. And the other thing is, Starlink's been going now for a couple of years, so I imagine that they've managed to get their hardware procurement price down, just through the sheer fact of scale, and been able to now they're getting the return on the investment for what they put into that hardware.
Mm.
So, like a lot of things, they've commoditized their hardware, and the money's in services. It's a bit like the inkjet printer. The printer's free, but now you're paying for the
Ooh,
monthly over and over and
yeah.
over again.
Now you take me back. There's a reason why I don't own any of them anymore.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about Starlink there. Now, Starlink is a good example of a business that Elon Musk is involved with, which has actually managed to do okay, perhaps despite the fact that Elon Musk is involved with it. You got SpaceX, you got some of the others. The argument I've heard made is that the reason why these businesses succeed is they have people whose specific job it is to stop Elon screwing things up, to keep him in his place, so to speak. Clearly, no one has that role or is brave enough to do it at Twitter.
Look, it's we now know that the reason Elon Musk bought Twitter is because he did this. Let's call it a creative management decision, where he decided to buy the thing unconditionally, and then people decided that, well, yeah, you have to do that. So he pretty much bought it because he got told to, and he was going to lose that court case when he was trying to get out of it. So he's stuck with this thing. He does need to turn it around and make it profitable. I mean, he said that the reason, without the layoffs that went through late last year and early this year, without those layoffs, the company would have folded pretty quickly. Whether that's true or not is, depends on how heavily invested you are in the Elon Musk reality distortion field. But otherwise, you know, he's making some interesting decisions. Painting over the W in the Twitter sign in San Francisco was an interesting decision last week, so that now it's branded as Titter because that's funny.
Very highbrow. Very
And he
highbrow.
did also change his name temporarily on Twitter. So his user handle was changed to, and it was Harry, and he spelt the surname Bolz. So you can
Again,
put that
very
together.
highbrow. Yeah.
He's yeah. Look, I feel like he's the Benny Hill of technology.
Needs to be running around San Francisco with his little theme song.
Yeah, that's right. But on the other hand, he is trying to monetize some things, and the blue tick is a great example of what he's trying to monetize.
But well, he wants roughly what, 10 US dollars, give or take a dollar per month for someone like you and I. We've got legacy blue ticks being journalists, so he wants us to hand over $10 a month to keep those blue ticks. Now, wasn't that all supposed to go away on April 1st and we're going to have our blue ticks taken away? It's now 2 weeks later and I checked and my blue tick's still there.
Yeah, my blue tick's there. And the reason you and I still have our blue ticks is because we're obviously very responsible adults, and we
Oh,
have not
clearly,
slagged
yeah,
off.
that must be it.
That must be it. But we haven't slagged off the blue tick thing on Twitter, because apparently, if you do slag it off and you've got one, you get it removed fairly quickly. That seems to be,
Sounds like
and
due process. That sounds fair and
it
reasonable,
sounds
yeah.
legit. But the other thing is, of course, that because this is the most highbrow and funniest person in technology, um, it's now being removed on April 20, which is in American date terms 420, which is the number of the legislation in California that was used to legalize marijuana. And 420 has got a long, long history of being related to the smoking of the wacky weed.
So really, we
For
can't take that date seriously either. For all we know, that could come and go, and nothing could change.
it could, because I mean, I don't know. Is there another wacky date coming up in the calendar that he might, choose. I don't know. It could be that, when we get to, well, it'll have to be in June. If we get to the 9th of June, will we have like this, because we'll have a 6-9 in the date? Will that
Or
be the
Pi
date
Day.
that you'll
I
pick?
actually, yeah, 6 9. That sounds like about level with
Yeah, I don't
his
think the
sense of
Pi
humor.
date. I don't think
No,
Pi date will work out. And plus, Pi date has
too
passed about a
intellectual.
month ago for us.
So
So,
why is he dragging on his feet on this? What kind of pushback has there been against this policy?
look, I think well, firstly, I don't think people are paying for it. I think that's the biggest
It's
problem he's
five
got at the
percent. I've
moment.
seen 5% of people who already had a blue tick are paying for it.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm certainly not going to pay. I don't believe I'll pay for it.
I think it
They
would
have,
damage my reputation if I paid for it. I think people would think worse of me having paid for a blue tick than not having a blue tick at all.
but the other interesting thing is he has said that people who pay for their blue ticks will get fewer ads. He hasn't said ad free, but he said that
Few
the volume
ads.
of ads will be halved because you're paying, and you don't need the advertising revenue to monetize those accounts in the same way.
So I
So
only
that
hear
would be
about
an
the yellow
interesting.
iPhone 14 every 5 minutes instead of every 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, gosh, Apple is spending on that ad,
They
aren't they?
are, yeah.
It's boy, and yellow, really. Anyway, we digress ever so slightly. But yeah, I'm not sure that I would ever pay for the blue tick. I have said in the past that I would consider paying for other social media to go ad free. Um, but on the other hand, there's a long gap between me saying I'm going to pay for something and me actually paying for it.
It just seems that the amount of money that he's going to get out of people if they do pay for the blue tick is only a drop in the ocean compared to how much he's had to borrow and the kind of money that Twitter needs. Is it really even worth the hassle?
Look, it's interesting because we've kind of focused in the last few minutes when we've been talking about the $10 a month for, dare I say, ordinary people.
Hmm.
Um, I think the $1,000 a month that he's offering to companies is probably where he's hoping the real money comes from. If you get 1,000 companies on that, that's $1 million a month. And if you can get that 1,000 companies involved and get them to pay that 1,000 a month, then those companies can actually dish out their own blue ticks. So they become it becomes a self-certifying kind of
Yeah.
system. So in theory, I could go and buy myself $1,000 a month of gold ticks, and I could go to all my journo mates and say, "Hey, for $5 a month, would you like a blue tick?" And if I can get enough of them over the line, I could actually turn a profit on it, I guess, unless they've
Nice.
set some limits. Um, he says thinking new business model just pops into brain. But that's what he's hoping for. I suspect it's when the New York Times has said they won't pay the money, but I wonder if at some point they will, just to certify and blue tick their own journalists, so that when someone from the New York Times posts a story, we are certain that it is actually a legit story and not something that's been spoofed or spammed.
But it could just be spoofed or spammed because anybody can go out and pay for a blue tick and claim to be whoever they want to be. In theory, they check that, but I don't know how closely they check it.
Yeah, look, and the other thing that amongst all the different people who have lost their jobs at Twitter, the people that actually go out and do check content to make sure it's legit was a pretty big group of people that lost their jobs very quickly late last year. So that whole content moderation, content verification, and validation that you would hope would accompany a a user verification system doesn't exist in that organization anymore. Mind you, they also fired the guy that was in charge of the security for all the doors, and then they managed to lock themselves out and had to go and very nicely ask him to come back and show them how to unlock the doors. So, anything's possible over at Titter.
I hope he charged them a shitload of money. I hope he can retire on what they paid him for that one day's work.
Yeah, well, you would hope so.
It does seem that, well, I know that, blue ticks show up in all walks of life, but it does seem to me that that the media is one of the key industries that's really affected by the blue tick. Now, he doesn't have a great relationship with the media, does he?
No, because well, you know what happens if you do send an email to the PR at twitter.com email address.
I've heard it's not great.
You do receive a single character reply, and it's a poop emoji.
Again, very highbrow.
Highbrow. Like, I actually sent one to that address just to check, because to be honest, I did believe it was possible, but I really, it's sometimes seeing is believing. I
Yeah.
didn't want to be a moon landing, skeptic about this. I did want to actually go there myself and check. But it was pretty amazing. So that is something that's happening. In fact, I wrote a story about it that got published that was quite funny, just about perhaps it's not the best way to do media relations, is to send people piles of shit in response.
The thing that I don't understand is that the blue tick was originally about authenticity and the fact that you could trust the source, which is why it's of such the original concept of the blue tick was so appealing to the media to be able to say that
Mm,
yes, we are who we claim to be. But everything that Elon's done is actually debasing and devaluing the blue ticks. Like he wants people to pay for it, but he's made it worth nothing now. The
mm.
fact that he doesn't take it seriously, but also the fact that some the Nazis I think went out and bought a blue tick the other day and got themselves certified, so anybody can have a blue tick.
Mm. So, just out of curiosity, because you and I both still have the legacy blue tick of
The OG
approval.
blue tick.
Yeah, the OG. Did you seek yours out, or did it just magically appear one day?
Mine just magically appeared. It was about
Yeah,
more than 10 years ago. They did
yeah,
a
same.
round. I think I was in the second round, but I was a
Yeah.
bit unusual in that most people who got them that early on were staff writers. And I was a
Mm.
freelancer, but I think because I wrote so much for the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, they just assumed I worked for
Yeah, and it was similar for me. I got one pretty early on, and it
them. Yeah.
just sort of magically it was there one day, and I thought, oh, well, that's nice.
But they
Um,
never checked with me to see if I was who I actually said I was.
no, but I did have an instance where I did have an impersonator on Twitter that had a
Fake
username.
Anthony Caruana. I love it.
There was an. It turns out someone wanted to pretend to be me, and they had my profile pic on their account and all that sort of stuff. And I just when I saw it, I just reported it, and the account disappeared, which is something that clearly won't happen ever again because now account impersonation doesn't seem to be a thing that they really care terribly much about. But yeah, it's funny. We kind of value that blue tick ourselves as a way of verifying that we are who we are when we're on Twitter, but we didn't pay for it. We got it given to us. Um, and I don't know how I feel about the fact that I feel indignant about losing it, even though I never paid for it and never asked for it.
But I think the fact you didn't pay for it is what made it so valuable. The fact that you couldn't just go out and buy one, you couldn't just throw money at the problem. You had to
Yeah,
have this authenticity to get one. Now it's just about cash.
yeah, that's right. And that was the thing. It was, dare I say it, it was a sign of having some integrity over at Twitter that they actually cared about the veracity of the people that were on the platform and what they were saying and what they were sharing.
Enjoying the show? That's great. Don't forget to subscribe, which you can do on every podcast platform you've ever heard of. Just search for Vertical Hold or go to our website, verticalhold.com.au, where we've got handy buttons for every single podcast platform.
So, Anthony, it seems that over the last couple of years, the idea of getting things to your house as quickly as possible has been a popular business model. And I think we can all guess why. Um, but it has come to an unfortunate end for quite a few of them. MilkRun is the latest victim. They cease trading on Friday and lay off 400 people. What's the story here?
Look, I think this is it's unfortunate. Firstly, look, we should extend our sympathy. This is a company that did try to do something, had a good business model for its time, but unfortunately, it didn't kind of pan out for them in the long term. So I think there's a couple of lessons here. Is one is that not every business opportunity is eternal. Some businesses thrive because of a specific set of circumstances, and the pandemic did create a specific set of circumstances where people who didn't want to venture out, even if they were allowed to go to their local supermarket, out of an abundance of caution, chose not to go down that road and preferred to have things delivered to them promptly, and that gave them that opportunity. So things like companies like MilkRun were well placed to take advantage of that as a business opportunity for them. And let's be frank, it provided a pretty valuable service during, particularly if you think about Victoria, where we're in lockdown for 11 million days or
Hmm.
something in a row. Uh, it was a pretty valuable thing that they were doing. But clearly, people aren't that keen on it. not seeing nearly as many Coles or Woolworths delivery vans in my neighbourhood delivering groceries as I did, during
Yeah,
during
I'd
the
say the
pandemic,
same. Yeah.
or even in just after. So I wonder if those delivery services have pared back a little bit. I have seen people do a lot more click and collect. I think click and collect has become a permanent fixture of the way we shop now. And it certainly meant, I know my local supermarkets redesigned the back part of the supermarket to be a delivery depot for people to back their cars in and get their groceries, shunted into the boot of their car and not have to go into the actual supermarket.
Yeah.
So all these different business models have evolved as a result of the pandemic. But MilkRun's not alone in when you start to sort of think about it. If you broaden it out to tech in general, we've seen massive rounds of tech layoffs over the last 12 months or so, and those were yeah.
Sorry, before we go on from MilkRun, let's just define what they actually set out to do. They initially promised that they could deliver groceries to you in 10 minutes. Now, look at look at the size of Amazon when they came to Australia, what they originally tried to do, and what they thought was a bit too difficult. MilkRun thought it was a good idea to build dark warehouses within, 10 minutes delivery of not everywhere. They were smart. They picked the hipster suburbs to target. But was it ever practical? Someone must have realized that that was not sustainable and scalable.
Yeah, and I think the magic word in what you said there was sustainable.
Yeah.
It worked for a couple of years.
Even
and
they
that's
dropped
the
the 10
reality.
minutes after a while. Even they realized it wasn't
Yeah.
feasible.
And look, I just think about I've got a supermarket that is about 900 meters from my home. In fact, I frequently will. If I only need one bag of stuff, I'll walk to my supermarket and back.
Yeah, I'd be about the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I sit there and go, look, it's less than a kilometre away. If I jump in my car, drive to the supermarket, buy 3 litres of milk and drive home, it takes about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's with me running in, self-checking out and all the rest of it. How they thought 10 minutes was reasonable or achievable regularly is a pretty big ask. If they'd said 30 minutes, I could probably buy that if they basically had drivers sitting at the fronts of supermarkets just waiting. But the whole infrastructure play that they had around warehouses and stuff, that doesn't make sense to me. Because surely you would just park all your people in front of supermarkets and go and grab the stuff. Or
That's what I was
go
thinking
through
too.
wholesalers.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Because like in the early days of the .com craze, I think it was pets.com, one of the pet online delivery mobs went out and bought all their own trucks, which of course is
That's right.
stupid because you know that you don't do that. You outsource that to somebody else. Now look at Uber Eats. They don't cook, do they? They don't make the food. They just play the middleman. So yeah, surely someone should have tried to out MilkRun by saying, I'll just get a guy to sit outside Safeway and wait until you order stuff.
And in fact, that happens now because you can use Uber and so Uber Eats. What's the other one? DoorDash and a couple of the others will now do grocery deliveries as well.
And
So you
people
can
already
do that.
use those apps for other things, so they're naturally going to have an advantage over something like MilkRun.
Yeah, that's right. So it is one of those things where the business model made sense. Perhaps wasn't perfect in execution at the time. Like the 10-minute thing doesn't seem to gel for me, but it did make sense during the pandemic. The problem is that now that I go to most local supermarkets, it's as busy as it ever was. In fact, I think I went on the day before Good Friday, and it was bedlam. And I went the day after Good Friday, and it was even more bedlam. It was like the shopping apocalypse had happened because we couldn't go to the supermarket for 24 hours. So I don't think people have given up on supermarket shopping or shopping in general. So I think it was an idea that was valid for its time and is now shown to not be not to be what people want anymore.
Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Anthony for joining us again.
My pleasure, mate. Always love being on the show. One of my favourites.
Now, Alex isn't here, so it falls upon me to throw the 3 questions of doom at you. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And as a long-time tech journo, what's your favourite story you've written over the years?
I'll do them in order. I won't do the thing that they do on some game shows where you answer them out of order
I'll
just
answer
to
the second
screw
part
things
first.
up.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm not going to do that. Find my work online. So the easy one is anthonycaruana.com, which is kind of the haunted house of abandonment, which I do occasionally write things to, but it's probably the easiest place to find me. But I do have a little side hustle, which I'm doing for fun at the moment, called Australian Apple News, and you'll find that at australianapplenews.com. On social media, the easiest thing is it's my name, Anthony_Caruana. You'll find me on Twitter with a soon to be removed blue tick. And my favorite story that I've written. Look, I've had some fun writing some stories. I'm gonna not. Can I nominate more than one that have been a couple of good laughs?
Yeah.
So I did a series of stories for Lifehacker a few years ago, looking at tech leaders and how the different styles of technology leaders that are out there. And I looked at Steve Jobs and the way he set up his succession to Tim Cook. Also, Bill Gates and his succession through Steve Ballmer over to Satya Nadella. But the one that really got me was the one that I wrote about Elon Musk and his leadership style at the time. And I'm particularly thankful to Chris Jager, who gave this story the best headline of a story I've ever given. And it was Elon Musk, genius or douche canoe. So I get a good laugh out of that. And I thank Chris for writing that headline, because that was not the headline I went with, but the headline worked. And the other story was one that was a bit more of a serious story. I interviewed the CEO of a company called RSA, big security, global security company, very well known. And I interviewed their CEO after some stuff had broken about them potentially giving the keys to their encryption castle to the American government to allow American government officials to break through the encryption of some parties in order to spy on what they were doing. And that had gone to court in a couple of instances where where that company had lost court cases over that. And when I asked him about it, he point blank lied about it, even though it was all on the legal record and had been played through in court. And the headline on that story was actually named the guy and just asked the question of, is he delusional or just a bald-faced liar? So that was some of my favourite stories that I've got to write over the years.
It's always good to keep these people on their toes.
Oh, love it.
And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, assuming that Twitter is still around. I'm not expecting the blue tick. Or verticalhold.com.au or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks, everyone, for dropping by. And don't forget to drop us a line and let us know what you think about the show.